I was kidnapped. Accidentally. When I was 2 years old, I lived in San Diego. My mom worked for her parents in a bakery they owned, and one afternoon she pulled into the back of the shop. She was so familiar with the place that she never felt unsafe, sort of like leaving your car unlocked at home. I was asleep in the car and she just wanted to run inside real quick to grab something. Literally should have taken a couple of minutes. In the time she was inside, two men who had illegally come into America from Mexico got caught and were trying to get back before they were arrested. The men stole the car I was sleeping in and attempted to use it to get back to Mexico. My older sister noticed first and went inside to tell my mom that the car was missing. At first, my mom didn't believe her and said she parked in a different spot than usual, but my sister insisted it was gone. My mom went outside and lo and behold, it was gone. In an instant panic, my mom just stood there screaming, like some cliché scene in a movie as she recalls. My grandmother was already on the phone with the police. Typically, car thefts in San Diego don't get much attention, but seeing as I was in the car, it quickly became very serious. My father and uncle at the time were in the highway patrol and immediately began a search, including helicopter surveillance and basically closing the border of California to prevent their escape. The whole affair quickly made it to the national news. Meanwhile, the two men who were totally oblivious to my presence until after driving around a while decided to do something about that. They pulled into a Jack-in-the-Box and got me a chocolate milk and a balloon. They then went into a neighborhood, pulled a stroller out of the trunk, put me in it, and wheeled me up to a nice random old lady's house and left me there with a note of deep apology. They said they never intended to abduct me and that they have children of their own. I laugh to this day imagining what people must have thought of two Hispanic men pushing a little white boy around in a stroller with chocolate milk. I also shudder to think what could have happened if they were more desperate, more apathetic towards my well-being. They then continued to make their escape in my dad's Oldsmobile until a helicopter spotted them and they were apprehended. I was found at that nice lady's house just as happy as can be. In fact, my mom's overwhelming emotion when we were reunited was kind of bizarre to me. After all, I just went on a car ride and got some chocolate milk. The car was returned intact and became my sister's car in high school. We still have VHS tapes somewhere of police footage from the helicopter, interviews with my family and I. If I ever meet those two men, I think I would actually thank them for knowing what was right, even in what may have been their darkest hour.
So I had planned to go on a date with my then girlfriend, Hannah. Had been saving up to do something super special with her. Would start off with a movie, then lunch at a fancy restaurant, then go for a jewelry fitting and get some sterling silver lock chains made, and then end the day with dinner at my parents' house to introduce her to the family. On the day of the date, she called to cancel, saying her aunt had died. I was disappointed, but also felt sorry for her and knew it was a tough time for her family. I then decided to go out and look for something to do. I went to the cinema alone. Now, as I was waiting to get my ticket, guess whom I see wrapped in some other dude's hands, giggling and smooching? It was the devil's toenail herself, my girlfriend. Big smile, dressed all sexy and joking around. Unless her aunt's funeral was being held while watching Iron Man 1, unless they wore butt riders and crop tops at funerals in their family, and unless they greeted each other with kisses and giggles, it was obvious the witch was cheating on me. I was so mad. I stared at her for a while feeling like this. But I was looking more like this. But then I figured causing drama will just cause more embarrassment for me, and truth be told, I could tell by the size of the dude, he could easily whoop my butt. I walked up to them casually and greeted the demon and her boy toy. The panic look on her face was priceless. For a minute, I was worried she might just pass out. There was silence for something like 8 weeks. Well, it felt like 8 weeks, but it was more like 8 seconds. Figuring she had lost her speaking ability, I went ahead and introduced myself to her boy toy as an old friend of hers. He smiled and extended his hand. I just casually told them it was nice to see them. I started to walk away, but after a few steps, I heard a voice inside of me say to me, "You are such a wussy, so you just gonna let her walk all over you like that?" I turned around and returned to them and asked the dude if he was a fan of video games. He agreed enthusiastically. I then continued to ask him if he want to swap phone numbers and we could link up and play FIFA sometime. We swapped numbers and I left them. I didn't bother go watch the movie. I walked home heart in pieces but mind busy calculating her demise and the levels of pettiness I would unleash upon her. The following day, the dude sent a text, and after a few messages he was at my house, and we were playing FIFA. Careful probing of information from him revealed that he and that spawn of Judas had been dating for months. I thought of telling him that I had been dating her too, but I got lost in playing the game, and before you know it, I discovered the dude was a decent person. We played games, and he stayed for dinner with my family and drove home after. We hung out more as the days went by and became good friends. All this while, he didn't know the creature he was dating was my ex, and she didn't tell him despite knowing I was hanging out with him. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the best revenge ever. For weeks, she was always on her toes, anticipating, I am going to tell him. Each time he would appear moody, she would assume it's because I told him, and become hysterical, asking him to tell her what's wrong. She began making up conspiracy theories, like assuming her boyfriend knows the truth, and he only dating her so that he can hurt her later. She tiptoed around me and being super nice to me. But I wasn't done with her yet. There was the next phase of vengeance. I introduced one of her friends, Sheila, to the dude. Sheila didn't know the dude was dating Hannah. Before you know it, Sheila and the dude are hitting it off, and they start dating behind Hannah's back. Yes, the dude now cheating. Someone in my shoes would have made sure Hannah found out, but I didn't. I was now John Kramer, aka the Jigsaw, in this game. So Sheila and the dude hit it off deeply. They became inseparable. The dude caught serious feelings for Sheila. He confessed to me and asked what he must do. Being a good friend, I told him to follow his heart. He went and told Hannah she should move on because she had changed and was suddenly acting weird. Yes, people, Hannah's paranoia about me hanging with her boyfriend had turned her into a psycho. She asked the dude if he was dumping her because of me. He asked her why he would do that, though, and it hit her that he didn't know. He was actually dumping her because he had found someone else, her friend. Years down the line, the dude is actually my best friend, and he's still with Sheila. The finale was when Hannah bumped into me, my new girlfriend. The dude and his fiancée Sheila on a double date. The look she had was priceless.
I decided to get an STD check, not for any itch or twitch, but for that sweet emotional high five. I called my neighbor, my unofficial big bro, 3 years wiser. "What's the deal?" I asked. He shrugged, sperm sample, dick swab, blood check, piece of cake. Cool, I thought, mentally prepping to crank one out in a cup. Clinic day, nerds jangling like loose change. I'm ushered by a grandma nurse to a bathroom. No mood lighting, no spicy magazines, just a sink and a clear cup. My neighbor swore they'd have porn, but nada. Imagination it is, then. I'm over the sink, channeling my inner Casanova, and bam, I'm done in record time. Too fast, maybe? I loiter for 10 minutes, avoiding freak status. Finally, I hand Grandma Nurse my proud contribution. She's annoyed I took so long, sets the cup on a desk, then jiggle, picks it up. Her face morphs from confusion to horror movie scream. "Sir," she stammers, "we only needed your urine." My face burns, legs wobble, and I'm drowning in shame. No witty comeback, no escape shovel. Just me, a hot cup of my baby batter, and a nurse staring like I'm a cum-handed monster.
Today is New Year's Eve. Up until the day after Christmas, I'd been engaged for 7 months. No longer. Want to know why? In mid-November, I learned my fiancé Sam had been cheating on me for 6 months. I discovered this by accident. My phone died and I needed to Google something, so I grabbed his iPad, which I hadn't used in a while. Sam has iMessage, so all his messages received and outgoing synced to the iPad's message app. I saw everything: texts, pictures, videos, saw it all. Apparently that masters in chemical engineering didn't constitute much intelligence, because the dumbass never changed his passcode. His side chick was a mutual friend of ours, Madison, who'd been in our home, had dinner with us, and was someone I'd actually seen as a potential bridesmaid. I spent days reading through everything and she was pregnant. He'd also been sending her money from our saving for a bigger apartment fund. I was catastrophic. I cried so hard I thought I'd throw up. But what really got me were the things they said about me. They mocked me, made jokes, ridiculed and belittled me, because I was the oblivious idiot fiancé who was so stupid. Madison would text me, chatting about wedding planning, then screenshot the messages and send them to Sam, laughing about how stupid I was. There was so much more, and far more vicious. I was gobsmacked. I felt like the meanest, bitchiest girls from high school were standing over me, laughing while I cried. But I was more confused than anything. Who the bloody hell was this person, pretending to be my Sam? Now I realize I'd only seen one side of him. For 3 years. Madison had actively been pushing Sam to dump me, and suggested the day after Christmas, after we'd returned home from seeing his family. When I read that particular message, something inside me snapped. I've been snickered at my whole life for being the poor kid in a wealthy school, for being a fat kid and teenager, for being an ugly duckling, for always having older, out-of-date things, for being quiet, for being an unphotogenic teenager. School kids are their own category of vicious. But growing up with all that gives you a core of steel, and anyone who tries to punch it will break their hand. I was not going to be humiliated. Not again, and not like this. So I thought ahead. Sam had been out of town when I discovered the messages, so I had a few days to pull myself together. For the next month and a half, I pretended everything was fine, at which I'm alarmingly good. Soon, my feelings toward him hardened until my initial devastation was gone and replaced by nothing. I'd wait until I was alone to read through his iPad, always putting it back in the same position in his bottom drawer. He never suspected anything, and still never changed his passcode. I collected the most telling evidence, the most explicit messages, the most vicious ones towards me, the ones mentioning the money, the ultrasound photos. I sent them all to myself, then covered my tracks. Christmas comes. We arrived at his parents' house on Christmas morning, with plans to spend the night. I spent the day watching that cheating, mocking, money laundering scumbag have a lovely Christmas. He kissed me goodnight, and whispered in my ear how much he loved me. Bastard. The next morning, before we all sat down for breakfast, I sent all the evidence to his mother, and his father, and his 2 siblings, and 3 of his cousins. Any family member whose contact I had, received it. I was able to time this, because Sam's family is pretty phone addicted, and they all get email notifications. My dear readers, I wish you could have witnessed the scene which befell that house. The weasel couldn't even face his own family. Talk about whiplash from that plot twist. He ran outside, and had to be cornered. His brother dragged him by his hair back into the house, but I didn't stay for that. I'd insisted we take my car, so I said my goodbyes to his family, reassured them this wasn't their fault, thanked them for everything, and left. That was 6 days ago. I changed the lock on our apartment, sold the ring, put all his things in trash bags, and put them outside the gate to our apartment complex, with the iPad on top. Luckily for him, no one took anything. He's currently staying with a friend, as none of his family in town will speak to him, and he can't afford a hotel indefinitely. And don't worry about Madison, I didn't forget about her. I sent everything to her mother, with whom she still lives.
How I died and then came back. The year was 1983, and yours truly, who worked at the UN Secretariat in New York, was on the last day of his summer leave at home in Moscow. The whole leave was spent in the rustic countryside village, far from the spoils of civilization. Since we had a rare luck of getting the Bolshoi tickets for this last evening, I thought I would better call one good old friend of mine whom I did not manage to see during this vacation and tell him that we would meet the first thing next summer. When I called, there was sort of a startled and awkward silence for a moment at the other end, and then he asked me, "Where are you calling from?" "From home, here in Moscow. Why are you asking?" "Well, just according to my info, you should be calling from other places." I did not understand what kind of joke he meant and said bye-bye. Then, the moment before we stepped out of the door, a lady who also worked in New York called, and my wife picked up. "Oh, I am so sorry," started the caller, but my wife interrupted. "Oh, it's me who is sorry. Cannot talk, late for the theater, will get in touch later," chirped she and hung up. Next day, we boarded Aeroflot flight to New York in good humor. The only slightly disturbing moment was that there was another couple aboard whom I recognized by sight as another Soviets working in New York who were giving me weird glances and whispering between themselves. But what can you do? The world is full of weirdos. When we landed at JFK and got our luggage, we went out to look for the Soviet bus that was always coming to meet the Moscow flights. As a courtesy, the UN Soviets were allowed also to use it free of charge, but they were sort of looked down on as a second-class sort of diplomats. Not this time, though. The bus driver basically wrestled suitcases from my hands and hauled them to the bus, which was unheard of, and the junior secretary on duty who came with the bus shook my hand warmly and inquired extra warmly about my health, and then delighted in hearing that it was okay. Looks like weirdos are coming out in droves today, thought I. When we came to our Skyview apartment house in Riverdale, Bronx, me and our daughters started unpacking, and my wife went to buy some food since our fridge was totally empty, which was unusual because normally friends would buy bread, milk, etc. a day before your arrival. Downstairs, she ran into a lady neighbor whom she played tennis with, and the lady started, "Oh, I am so sorry about your husband." My wife thought she meant a fender-bender car accident a couple of months ago, and surprised that she knew and remembered it, replied, "Oh, it's nothing. Worse things happen." Lady gave her another weird look of the day. At that time, I was calling one of my Russian buddies in the next apartment building to find out what's up. He picked up and immediately asked, "Where are you calling from?" A bit annoyed now by these sort of queries, I asked him why the question. "We'll explain in a flash," he said, and indeed, in a moment, he was in my apartment in a company of a bottle of vodka and told me that about 2 weeks ago, a lady came back from leave in Moscow with the bad news that I was hit by a car and died instantly. My good friends wanted to pack my things and stuff, but the Soviet mission told them to hold it because they did not have any confirmation of my demise from Moscow. But something was certainly not right because people called my Moscow apartment and my parents and in-laws, and nobody answered since they were all with me in the village with no phone connection. Nevertheless, as custom dictates, on the 9th day of my ruination, they had a wake in my friend's apartment and said some good words about me with the warmth ratcheted up by good old Stali, which we had at hand also and immediately proceeded to consume in celebration of my arrival from the dark side. A few other friends soon joined to observe my resurrection. My wife came from the supermarket and was a bit surprised to discover a party in full swing, but I explained to her that vodka was being consumed for a very good and valid reason. The whole puzzle got explained in a day or two. It occurred that there was another Soviet chap in New York with the trade mission who had twin daughters as I did and was about my age. And the poor lad indeed was killed by a car. But since the lady who brought the rumor to New York never heard of him, she got immediately convinced that it was me and brought this tragic news to New York and gave them the widest possible circulation. Couple of days at work followed when people are a bit surprised to see me. What was the bottom line? First, apparently people believe that you can give them a call from the other side because at least 2 of them asked where I was calling from. Second, they do believe that one doesn't come at full strength after resurrection because I was repeatedly asked about my health and got generous help with my luggage. Third, my wife had to live for a couple of days with the reputation of cold-hearted bitch because she dismissed offhandedly all the condolences that people tried to offer. Finally, the Russian wisdom says that those who were rumored to be dead and for whom a wake was had before their death should live super-duper extra long lives. The jury is still out on this one.
That for a good number of years I lived my life believing absolutely that I was the Christ of this era. I was brought up from childhood being told this was my life, that I was born in immaculate conception, that my mother was Mary. It wasn't something I dreamed up for myself, but rather, years later, what the psychologist diagnosed it as: transferred delusional disorder. I was raised in a small, nonetheless prominent religious cult. Tensions were high, so once 18, I removed myself from the family cult and was slowly getting to grips with reality. Then an old friend, knowing my past, just said one evening, "Julian, your mother is getting old. I think it's time you take on your mantle." And so I did. I gathered my own disciples quickly and took the bull by the horns. Profound religious delusion coupled with strong people skills and a knowledge of hypnosis and general magic is quite a strong potion. Due to my upbringing, I never saw the hypnosis or use of the principles of magic to be fraudulent. The ends justified the means, and I was convinced that biblical Jesus employed similar methods at the will of God. Most people don't have a hard time believing that for 5 years I lived my life as Christ. They do, however, have a hard time believing I could perform the obligatory miracles. I did believe I had a direct line to God, and that I communicated with Him. He'd direct the way. Day by day, I'd rely on God's hand to work some of the magic, and He'd let me know when I had to roll my sleeves up and put my own skills to work. If you have trouble with the term hypnosis, I don't particularly like the word myself. Think of it as a guided and heightened sense of mental focus on one thing, while peripherals fall out of conscious realization. And then imagine someone of expertise intensifying this and layering one upon another confusion and verbal confirmation factors. Following that come the suggestions which kind of enter the peripherals of cognition without resistance, sometimes unnoticed. It was all totally real for me and for those that believed in me. I traveled the world like this. Towards the end, bit by bit, I began to realize it wasn't true. It's about the same time I realized my family were terribly ill. One went to prison. At the time my delusion crashed, I personally lost all belief in any messiahs. I'd done enough to parallel many of them, and I had a deep understanding of the power of belief. As you can imagine, I became a skeptic and atheist, but truth is, it still took another 3 to 5 years to get it out of my system, out of my thinking. Then, once stable enough, I continued to pursue a fascination in human cognitive fallibility, hypnosis, and belief systems. Almost 20 years later, I'm still an atheist, a good teacher and director, and an effective hypnotist.
The story of how my wife and I met. Most people think we embellish or otherwise alter our story, but it is 100% true. I'll be as brief as possible without leaving out any of the major details. In my small hometown, Athens, Alabama, pop, about 20,000, Walmart was the place to go for most of your needs, especially if you needed more than groceries. I was in Walmart on an evening, browsing the electronics, music section, when I catch a glimpse of this absolutely stunning girl walk by. I was 18 at the time, out of high school, but still painfully shy, as I'd always been. However, I was at once smitten and really wanted to talk to her, so I did what any painfully shy 18-year-old guy would do and followed her at an overly cautious distance until I could hopefully maneuver around to accidentally meet her face-to-face, as approaching from the rear, as much as I was enjoying the view, was ridiculously intimidating. I tried hard. I failed miserably. She apparently didn't find what she was looking for, and I obviously discarded any need to further peruse the CD selection as soon as I'd begun pursuing, so out the front doors of the store she went, and in a, if she knows what I'm doing, she'll call the cops move, I followed still, maintaining a careful distance. Into our cars, out of the parking lot, and down the road. At this point, I begin to question my own sanity. I push myself to make either a firm commitment that, if she does stop somewhere else, I will actually speak to her, or to go ahead and drop this madness and just turn around. If she does stop and I do follow, what if she recognizes me from Walmart? Won't that be instant, go away? But I don't think she actually saw me, at least not in a way that would register that I followed her. She turned into a convenience store. I followed. I'm so going to talk to her. I let her go in a few moments ahead, then followed. I enter the door, and sure enough, she's got a drink in her hand and is walking back to the front of the store. This is it, face to face. I look up, and our eyes briefly lock. Her eyes. Oh my God. I'm absolutely stunned. They are the most intriguing greenish, grayish, and almost, am I seeing this right? Yellowish, ridiculously unique and captivatingly beautiful. I know the look on my face had to look exactly like Raffi Parker's face in A Christmas Story when he's locked eyes on the Red Ryder in the Higby storefront display. I smile, sheepishly, nod, then walk to the back of the store, feigned interest in whatever drink I end up buying, and watch as she drives away into the night. Failure. Utter failure. A few weeks later, I'm at work and get a call from a longtime friend whom I hadn't heard from in quite some time. He owns a small sporting goods store in town and says he has this girl working for him who is trapped, his words, in a relationship with an older guy, again, his words, who doesn't treat her too well. He knows I've dated some good-looking girls. I wasn't as shy when I was properly introduced. It's the whole cold approach that terrified me. And wanted to know if I'd come try to steal her away and save her. Not exactly how I like to start a relationship, but it sounds like fun. What 18-year-old guy doesn't like a good challenge, right? The next day, I take my lunch break and head to his store. I walk in and ask if Steve is in. The clerk goes in the back to get him, and I walk over to the baseball caps. I hear Steve's voice as he approaches, talking to a female, but I can't really make out what they're saying. He walks through the swinging door. I walk over to shake his hand, but when the door swings back open the other way, I stopped dead in my tracks. Was that? Surely not. I look nervously back and forth from Steve to the door. Just a moment later, she walks through. Those eyes. It's her. I give myself a pep talk, knowing I'll be bolstered by having a mutual party to break the ice. Game on. You got this. She's every bit as beautiful as I remember. Our eyes meet again, and this time I smile as Steve introduces us. She holds out her hand. A handshake? It's different, I guess. I can deal with that. I grasp her hand, lightly, but tight enough to control the duration of our touch. I hold my gaze into those eyes as I hold her hand. It's very brief dramatic pause. Nice to meet you, I say, infinitely more confidently than it reads here. Her name is Casey. Then, as my eyes quickly take note of the rest of her face and I release her hand, my rememberer begins skittering back many, many years. I've seen her before. Way, way before I stalled, before I followed her from Walmart to the gas station. In my head, gears whir and bells clang as I search through my internal index of faces from my past. Then, the mechanics grind to a halt. The school bus. First grade. First grade? Out of my mouth, before I've given any real thought as to how the ensuing conversation might go, gush the words, "Did you go to East?" East, Limestone, Alabama, one of the county schools in Limestone County. Only I knew she didn't go to East. I did. I went from kindergarten through graduation, and I most certainly would have known if Casey had gone to East. I scramble back through my memories for more details as her reply comes. No, I went to Clements. Another of the county schools. Clements was on the exact opposite side of the county. Yes, there is a west, but it's farther northwest than Clements. In an instant clarity, there was a little girl that rode the same bus I did, but only for a year. She was in kindergarten when I was in first grade, and she cried every single day. She would cry to stay with her mother. I remember now, that little girl's name was Casey too. I had often wondered what happened to Casey. This was long before homeschooling was an option for kids who just didn't want to go to public schools, so I had assumed they had moved. But in my mind, of course, they went much farther than the other side of the county. I remembered on many occasions offering her something, anything from my lunchbox, to try to make her feel better. I hated to see her cry. And now, a full 13 years into our marriage, I still hate it when those beautiful greenish, grayish, yellowish eyes shed a tear. And yes, I later told her about the Walmart incident, which she found incredibly endearing. Thank God.